what people actually ate in medieval castles. The first thing that hits you as you wake up in the stone-walled servants' quarters isn't the cold, though that's certainly present. It's the smell, wood smoke, onions, and something vaguely meaty wafting up from the kitchens below. Your stomach growls, but you know better than to expect anything resembling breakfast for hours yet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You roll off your straw-filled mattress, your joints protesting against the perpetual dampness that seems to seep through even the thickest castle walls. The tiny window near your sleeping alcove shows the faintest hint of dawn, which means it's time to begin the elaborate dance of feeding an entire castle full of people who have very specific opinions about what they will and won't eat. As you stumble down the narrow stone steps to the kitchens, the temperature rises noticeably. The great hearth has been burning all night, tended by the poor soul whose job it is to make sure the fire never dies. In medieval times, rekindling a fire from scratch was a genuine ordeal. No matches, no lighters, just flint and steel, and a lot of patience. Better to keep it burning and assign someone to feed it logs through the night. The kitchen is already bustling with activity despite the early hour. The head cook, a barrel-chested man named Willem, whose forearms are permanently stained with soot and grease, is barking orders at a collection of scullery maids, potboys, and assistant cooks who move with the practiced efficiency of people who know that breakfast will be served whether they're ready or not. "You there," Willem calls out, spotting you. "The spit needs turning, and mind you keep it steady. Lord Aldrich complained yesterday that his mutton was charred on one side and raw on the other, and I'll not have my reputation ruined by an unsteady hand." You take your position at the great roasting spit, a massive iron contraption that spans nearly the width of the enormous fireplace. Today's offering is a haunch of venison, the result of yesterday's hunt, slowly turning over the glowing coals. The meat is already developing a beautiful golden crust, but you can tell by the way it resists the spit's rotation that it's going to be a long morning of constant careful turning. The rhythm is oddly meditative. Turn, pause, turn, pause. The fat renders slowly dripping into the coals below with a satisfying hiss. Other servants move around you chopping vegetables, kneading dough, and stirring the contents of enormous iron pots suspended over smaller fires. The cacophony of kitchen sounds, chopping, sizzling, bubbling, the occasional shouted instruction creates a symphony that would be familiar to any cook throughout history. But this isn't just any kitchen. This is the heart of a medieval castle, and that means the food being prepared here isn't just sustenance, it's a statement. Every meal served to the Lord and his guests is a display of wealth, power, and sophisticated taste. The better the food, the more impressive the host. And in a world where alliances could shift as quickly as the wind, impressing your guests might literally be a matter of life and death. As you turn the spit, you watch the organized chaos around you. Near the stone ovens, bakers are pulling out loaves of bread that will be sorted by quality. The finest, whitest loaves will go to the Lord's table, while coarser, darker bread will be distributed to the servants. Bread isn't just food in medieval times, it's a visible marker of social status. The whiter your bread, the higher your station. A young girl, probably no more than 12, is carefully washing dishes in a wooden tub filled with water that's been heated over the fire. There's no soap as we know it, just sand ash and a lot of scrubbing. Her hands are already red and chapped from the work, but she performs her task with the kind of focused attention that suggests she's grateful to have any work at all. In the corner, an elderly woman is grinding spices with a mortar and pestle, the rhythmic sound barely audible over the kitchen's din. Those spices, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, are worth more than most people's annual income. Each pinch represents a connection to distant lands, exotic trade routes, and the vast network of merchants who risk their lives to bring these treasures to European tables. The air is thick with smoke from the fires, steam from the cooking pots, and the mingled aromas of roasting meat, baking bread, and simmering vegetables. It's a smell that would cling to your clothes, your hair, your very skin. There's no escaping it. Everyone in the castle, from the lowliest scullery maid to the lord himself, carries the scent of wood smoke and cooking food. As the morning progresses, you begin to understand the intricate timing required to produce a proper medieval feast. Nothing can be rushed, but everything must be perfectly coordinated. The bread must be timed to emerge from the ovens just as the meat reaches the perfect doneness. The vegetables must be cooked enough to be palatable, but not so much that they turn to mush. And everything must be served at the proper temperature, which in a world without warming lamps or modern kitchen equipment requires careful planning and no small amount of luck. The venison on your spit is beginning to smell absolutely divine. The exterior is now a deep, rich brown, and when Willem tests it with a long knife, the juices run clear. You help him lift the heavy roast from the spit, your hands protected by thick leather gloves, and watch as he begins the delicate process of carving it into portions appropriate for the various ranks of people who will be dining today. The best cuts the tenderloin. The prime slices from the haunch will go to the high table, where the lord and his most important guests will sit. The lesser cuts will be distributed according to a complex hierarchy that takes into account not just social rank, but also political alliances, personal relationships, and the subtle art of medieval diplomacy. As you wipe the sweat from your brow and prepare to help with the next course, you realize that working in a medieval castle kitchen isn't just about cooking food, it's about participating in an elaborate social ritual that plays out 3 times a day, every day, with the precision of a military operation and the stakes of a diplomatic negotiation. And this is just breakfast. The Great Hall is a marvel of medieval architecture, its soaring stone walls decorated with colorful tapestries that serve both artistic and practical purposes. They help muffle the echoes that would otherwise make conversation impossible, and they provide a bit of insulation against the perpetual chill. Long wooden tables stretch across the length of the hall, their surfaces scarred and stained from years of use. You're carrying a heavy wooden tray laden with pewter plates, each one carefully polished to a dull shine. The plates themselves are a luxury. Many of the servants will eat from thick slices of day-old bread called trenchers, which serve as both plate and eventually food. The bread soaks up the juices from the meat and vegetables, becoming soggy and flavorful by the end of the meal. As you arrange the plates on the high table, you can't help but notice the elaborate salt cellar placed in the center. It's a magnificent piece of metalwork standing nearly 2 feet tall and shaped like a miniature castle. This isn't just a condiment container, it's a status symbol. Salt was incredibly valuable in medieval times, essential for preserving food, and often used as currency. The placement of the salt cellar literally determines the social hierarchy of the meal. Sit above the salt, and you're among the elite. Below it, and you're distinctly less important. The lord and lady of the castle take their seats at the center of the high table, their chairs more elaborate than everyone else's. These aren't just seats, they're thrones carved with intricate designs and cushioned with silk pillows. Their elevated position allows them to survey the entire hall, keeping an eye on their guests and their servants alike. The first course begins with ceremony. A procession of servants carries in the bread, followed by small dishes of honey butter and cheese. The The bread is still warm from the ovens, its crust crackling as it's broken. The honey is thick and golden, probably from the castle's own beehives, while the butter is fresh and pale, yellow churned just that morning from cream that was probably still warm from the cow. But here's where medieval dining gets interesting. There are rules, so many rules. You can't just grab food and start eating. Everything must be done in the proper order with the proper etiquette according to your station. The lord and lady are served first naturally, but even then, there's a specific protocol. The lord's food is tasted by a servant before he eats it, not for flavor, but for poison. In an age where political alliances shift like sand and enemies can become friends overnight, caution is literally a matter of life and death. The bread is broken, not cut. Cutting bread at the table is considered crude, almost violent. Instead, pieces are carefully pulled apart and shared. The act of breaking bread together is symbolic. It represents trust, community, and shared purpose. When you break bread with someone, you're saying that you trust them enough to share a meal, and by extension, that you're willing to be vulnerable in their presence. The morning meal is relatively simple compared to dinner, but even so, it reflects the complex social hierarchy of medieval life. The lord and lady receive the finest cuts of meat, the whitest bread, and the clearest wine. Their immediate family sits next to them, receiving slightly less elaborate fare. Further down the table, the ranking of guests becomes a careful negotiation of politics, family relationships, and personal honor. Knights and nobles visiting the castle are seated according to their own rank and their relationship to the host. A visiting earl might sit close to the lord, while a minor knight might find himself near the end of the table. Foreign ambassadors receive special treatment, their placement at the table sending subtle messages about the host's attitude toward their home countries. The servants, meanwhile, eat at separate tables in the same hall, their meals consisting of whatever remains after the nobles have been served. This isn't necessarily bad food, often it's the same dishes, just the less choice portions. A servant might eat the same stew as the lord, but while the lord gets the tender chunks of meat, the servant gets more broth and vegetables. As you move through the hall, refilling wine cups and clearing empty plates, you overhear fragments of conversation. The lord is discussing plans for the upcoming harvest, his voice carrying the authority of someone who's never doubted his right to make decisions about other people's lives. His lady is gossiping quietly with a visiting noblewoman about the scandalous behavior of someone at court. At the lower tables, the conversation is more practical. Knights discuss the maintenance of their equipment, the training of their horses, and the latest news from other parts of the kingdom. Merchants talk about trade routes, the price of wool, and the political situation in nearby cities. Everyone is gathering information, making connections, and positioning themselves for future opportunities. The wine flows freely, even at the morning meal. This isn't because medieval people were particularly fond of drinking, though they certainly didn't shy away from it, but because wine was often safer to drink than water. The alcohol content killed many of the bacteria that made water supplies dangerous, and the grapes used to make wine were generally cleaner than the sources of drinking water. The wine itself varies dramatically in quality. The Lord's table receives wine imported from distant regions, carefully aged and stored in the castle's cellars. The lower tables get wine that's younger, harsher, and often watered down. But even the worst wine is better than risking the stomach ailments that could come from questionable water. As the meal progresses, you notice the subtle ways that food is used to send messages. When the Lord offers a particularly choice piece of meat to a guest, it's a sign of favor. When someone is served wine from the Lord's own cup, it's a mark of special honor. And when certain guests are served before others despite their lower rank, it suggests that deals are being made, alliances are being formed, or debts are being acknowledged. The morning meal might seem simple, but it's actually a carefully orchestrated performance in which every gesture, every serving, every placement of food carries meaning. You're not just feeding people, you're participating in a complex social ritual that reinforces the hierarchy, displays the host's wealth and power, and creates opportunities for the kind of political maneuvering that keeps kingdoms running. By the time the last crumb is cleared and the tables are wiped down, you've witnessed a masterclass in medieval diplomacy, all conducted over bread, cheese, and wine. And in just a few hours, you'll do it all again for the midday meal, with even higher stakes and more elaborate food. The afternoon sun streams through the narrow windows of the great hall, casting long shadows across the stone floor as you help prepare for the day's most important meal. Dinner in a medieval castle isn't just about eating, it's about spectacle politics and the kind of conspicuous consumption that would make a modern billionaire blush. You're in the spice room, a small chamber off the main kitchen that's kept locked at all times. The master cook has entrusted you with the key, a responsibility that comes with stern warnings about the value of its contents. As you open the heavy wooden door, you're hit with an aroma so intense it makes your eyes water, a complex blend of cinnamon, cloves, pepper, and dozens of other spices, whose names you can barely pronounce. These spices have traveled thousands of miles to reach this castle. The pepper in your hand originated in the forests of India, carried by merchants across dangerous seas and through bandit-infested trade routes. The cinnamon bark came from Ceylon, the cloves from the Moluccas, and the saffron, worth more than its weight in gold, was carefully harvested from crocus flowers in distant lands where the sun burns hotter and the customs are utterly foreign. Each spice represents not just flavor but power. The lord who can afford to serve heavily spiced food is demonstrating his wealth, his connections, and his place in the vast network of international trade that connects medieval Europe to the far corners of the known world. When guests taste the cinnamon in their wine or the pepper on their meat, they're not just experiencing flavor, they're tasting the Lord's importance. You carefully measure out portions of various spices, grinding them fresh with a mortar and pestle. The work is painstaking. Too much of any one spice can overpower a dish, while too little makes the expensive ingredients seem wasted. The master cook has trained you to use your nose, as much as your measurements, adjusting the blend by scent and instinct until it achieves the perfect balance. The main course for today's dinner is a whole roasted peacock, its feathers carefully removed before cooking and then reattached after roasting to create the illusion that this magnificent bird has somehow cooked itself while maintaining its natural beauty. It's a dish that requires not just culinary skill, but artistry, and it will be the centerpiece of the meal, carried into the great hall with great ceremony. But the peacock is just the beginning. There will be venison in a rich sauce made with wine and exotic spices, a whole salmon stuffed with herbs and wrapped in pastry, and an elaborate pie that contains not just meat, but also eggs, cheese, and dried fruits. Each dish is designed to showcase different aspects of the kitchen's capabilities and the Lord's wealth. As you work, you can hear the great hall being prepared for the evening meal. Servants are laying fresh rushes on the floor, a medieval form of carpet that will absorb spills and provide a slightly softer surface for feet. The rushes are mixed with herbs and flowers, which will release their fragrance when stepped on, helping to mask the less pleasant odors that inevitably accumulate in a hall full of people. The tables are being set with an elaborate display of serving dishes, goblets, and utensils. The Lord's table receives the finest pieces, silver goblets, decorated serving platters, and knives with carved handles. The lower tables get simpler fare, but even the humblest pewter plate represents a significant investment in a world where most people eat from wooden bowls. Musicians are tuning their instruments in the corner, preparing to provide entertainment during the meal. Music isn't just background noise in medieval dining. It's an integral part of the experience, helping to create the proper atmosphere and providing cues for the various courses. Different pieces of music signal different parts of the meal, helping to coordinate the complex choreography of service. As evening approaches, the guests begin to arrive. You watch from the kitchen doorway as they process into the great hall, their clothing a display of wealth and status, every bit as elaborate as the food they're about to eat. The visiting nobles are dressed in silk and velvet, their garments dyed in colors that require expensive materials and skilled craftsmen. The ladies wear elaborate headdresses and jewelry, while the men sport fur-trimmed robes and decorative weapons. The seating arrangement has been carefully planned for maximum political impact. A visiting duke sits at the Lord's right hand, a position of honor that acknowledges his importance and suggests potential alliances. A wealthy merchant, despite his lower birth, sits relatively close to the high table, a recognition of his economic power and the favors he might be able to provide. The meal begins with a ceremony that would be familiar to anyone who's attended a formal dinner today. The Lord stands and raises his goblet, offering a toast to his guests and to the various saints and political figures who deserve acknowledgement. The guests respond with their own toasts, each one carefully calibrated to show respect without appearing subservient. The first course arrives with great fanfare. Servants process into the hall carrying covered dishes, their movements synchronized like a military parade. The covers are removed simultaneously, revealing the evening's offerings in a dramatic display that draws gasps of appreciation from the guests. The peacock, resplendent in its reattached feathers, is placed in the center of the Lord's table, its artificial plumage creating the illusion that it might spread its wings and fly away at any moment. But here's where medieval dining gets truly interesting. The food you're serving isn't just about nutrition or even flavor, it's about storytelling. Each dish carries symbolic meaning, references to classical literature, religious significance, or political allegory. The peacock, for instance, represents both beauty and pride. Serving it suggests that the Lord is confident enough in his position to reference pride without fear of seeming arrogant. The elaborate pie, when cut, reveals layers of different ingredients arranged in patterns that might represent the coat of arms of the host's family or the heraldic symbols of honored guests. The salmon, prepared whole and decorated with herbs, might reference the Lord's control over fishing rights or his family's connection to coastal territories. As the meal progresses, you notice the careful attention paid to the order in which dishes are served and to whom. The Lord and his most honored guests receive the choicest portions, but even this follows specific rules. The best pieces of meat go to the highest-ranking men, while the ladies receive portions that are considered appropriate for their more delicate constitutions. The wine service is equally elaborate. Different wines are served with different courses, each one chosen to complement the food and to demonstrate the host's sophistication. The wine itself is often mixed with spices, creating complex flavors that would be completely unfamiliar to modern palates. A typical medieval wine might be flavored with cinnamon cloves and honey, creating a drink that's part beverage, part liquid dessert. The conversation during the meal is as carefully orchestrated as the food service. Topics are chosen to flatter the guests while allowing the host to display his knowledge and sophistication. Discussion might range from the latest news from court to philosophical questions about the nature of chivalry, but always with an underlying awareness of the political implications of every comment. As you move through the hall, refilling goblets and clearing plates, you're witnessing more than just a meal. You're seeing the medieval world in miniature. The careful hierarchy of seating, the symbolic meaning of the food, the elaborate display of wealth and taste, all combine to create a performance that reinforces social order while creating opportunities for the kind of negotiation and alliance building that keeps medieval society functioning. The spices you ground so carefully earlier are now fulfilling their purpose, not just flavoring the food, but announcing to everyone present that this lord has the wealth and connections to obtain the finest things from the far corners of the earth. Each bite of pepper-crusted meat, each sip of spiced wine is a reminder of the vast network of trade and politics that makes such luxury possible. By the time the last course is served and the final toast is raised, you've helped orchestrate an evening that will be remembered and discussed for weeks to come. The guests will return to their own castles with stories of the magnificent hospitality they received, the extraordinary food they ate, and the impressive display of wealth and power they witnessed. And in the complex world of medieval politics, such impressions can be worth more than armies. The bell tower chimes 6 times, marking the canonical hour of sext, and you feel your stomach tighten with a familiar mixture of hunger and dread. Today is Friday, which means it's a fast day, and in the medieval world that changes everything about how and what the castle eats. The Church's dietary laws aren't suggestions, they're divine commandments that can affect your eternal soul, and breaking them is a sin that could land you in purgatory for a very long time. You're standing in the kitchen watching the master cook's face as he contemplates the day's menu. Willem looks like a man trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle, which in a way he is. The Church has declared that today and every Friday, Wednesday, during Lent, and roughly 150 other days throughout the year, no one may eat meat from any animal that walks on 4 legs or flies through the air. Fish, however, is perfectly acceptable, as are eggs, dairy products, and anything that lives in water. The logic behind this might seem arbitrary to modern minds, but it makes perfect sense in medieval theology. Meat is considered a luxury, a pleasure of the flesh that can distract from spiritual contemplation. By giving up meat on designated days, Christians are supposed to focus their minds on higher things, using the slight discomfort of dietary restriction as a reminder of Christ's suffering and their own spiritual obligations. But here's where medieval creativity comes into play. The definition of fish is surprisingly flexible. You watch as Willem directs his assistants to prepare what appears to be a full meat dinner, but looks can be deceiving. The roast on the spit is actually a large piece of salmon carefully seasoned and cooked to resemble beef. The chicken in the pot is actually a preparation of eggs and fish molded and cooked to look like poultry. The most impressive deception is the bacon that will be served with the morning meal. It's actually thin slices of whale meat salted and smoked to create a flavor and texture remarkably similar to pork. In medieval classification, whales are considered fish because they live in water, making them perfectly acceptable for fast days. The fact that they're also massive air-breathing mammals is a theological technicality that most people are happy to ignore. As you help prepare these elaborate substitutions, you begin to understand the incredible creativity that medieval cooks brought to their work. They developed techniques for creating convincing meat substitutes using fish eggs and dairy products that would be impressive by any standard. Almond milk becomes the base for cream sauces. Ground fish is formed into shapes resembling sausages, and various combinations of eggs and fish create convincing imitations of virtually any meat dish. The nobility, of course, have access to the most elaborate substitutions. Their fast day meals might include imported sturgeon prepared to look like venison elaborate fish pies that resemble meat pastries, and delicate preparations of eel that have been seasoned and cooked to mimic the texture of chicken. The wealthy can afford to make their fasting almost as luxurious as their regular meals. The servants and common people have a much simpler experience. Their fast day meals consist largely of bread, vegetables, and whatever fish they can afford. Herring, sardines, and other inexpensive fish become the mainstays of their diet, often prepared in simple stews or soups that stretch a small amount of fish into a meal that can feed many people. But even these simpler preparations require skill and knowledge. Fish spoils quickly, especially in the days before refrigeration, so knowing how to select, prepare, and cook fish safely is a matter of life and death. The castle's cooks have developed techniques for preserving fish that allow them to maintain a steady supply even when fresh fish isn't available. Salt cod, for instance, becomes a staple of the medieval diet. The fish is cleaned, salted, and dried until it becomes as hard as wood, but when properly prepared, it can be reconstituted into a perfectly edible and nutritious meal. The process requires soaking the fish in water for days, changing the water regularly to remove the salt, and then cooking it with herbs and vegetables to create a flavorful dish. As the day progresses, you notice the different atmosphere in the castle during fast days. The meals are more solemn, the conversation more subdued. People eat more slowly, seemingly more aware of their food and its spiritual significance. The absence of meat creates a different kind of hunger, one that's not just physical, but also psychological. The church's regulations also create interesting social dynamics. On fast days, the usual markers of status and wealth are less obvious. Everyone from the lord to the lowest servant is eating fish instead of meat. The quality of the fish might differ dramatically, but the basic compliance with religious law is the same. In a small way, fast days create a kind of temporary equality that reflects Christian ideals of spiritual brotherhood. However, the wealthy still find ways to demonstrate their status. Their fish might be prepared with expensive spices served on silver plates and accompanied by elaborate side dishes. They might have access to luxury fish like sturgeon or salmon, while common people make do with herring or sardines. The form of the meal changes, but the underlying social hierarchy remains intact. As evening approaches, you help serve the day's final meal. The great hall is quieter than usual, the atmosphere more contemplative. The Lord leads the evening prayers with particular solemnity, acknowledging the spiritual significance of the day's dietary restrictions. The guests respond with their own prayers, their voices creating a low murmur that fills the stone hall. The food, despite being technically fast day fare, is still impressive. The fish has been prepared with skill and artistry. The vegetables are fresh and flavorful, and the bread is as good as any served on regular days. The wine flows as freely as ever. Alcohol apparently doesn't count as breaking the fast, a theological position that no one seems inclined to question too closely. As you clear the tables and help clean the kitchen, you reflect on the strange contradictions of medieval fasting. The church's rules are followed scrupulously, but with a creativity that sometimes seems to mock their spiritual intent. The wealthy manage to eat almost as well on fast days as on regular days, while the poor bear the real burden of dietary restriction. Yet there's also something genuine about the practice. The awareness of food, the conscious choice to limit certain pleasures, the shared experience of following religious law. All of these create a sense of community and spiritual purpose that transcends the mere mechanics of meal preparation. Even the elaborate substitutions and creative interpretations represent a kind of engagement with religious law that shows its importance in medieval life. As you finally retreat to your quarters, your stomach still slightly unsatisfied. Despite the evening's meal, you understand that you've participated in something more complex than just a change in menu. You've experienced the medieval world's attempt to balance spiritual aspiration with human nature, religious law with practical necessity, and individual desire with communal obligation. It's a balance that medieval people negotiated every week, and it shapes not just what they eat, but how they think about food pleasure and their relationship with the divine. Tomorrow will bring regular meals again with meat and fowl and all the rich foods that make medieval feasting so impressive. But the memory of today's restraint will linger, a reminder that even in a world of great luxury, some things are more important than immediate gratification. And perhaps that's the real point of fasting, not to punish the body, but to exercise the soul. The castle buzzes with an energy you've never quite experienced before. It's early October, and the harvest is complete. The granaries are full, the livestock are fat from summer grazing, and the Lord has declared that tonight's feast will be the most elaborate of the year. You're in the center of what can only be described as controlled chaos, as the entire castle prepares for an event that will be remembered and talked about for months to come. You've been awake since well before dawn, helping to prepare what will be the most complex meal of your life. The harvest feast isn't just a celebration of the year's agricultural success, it's a display of the Lord's wealth, generosity, and power that will be witnessed by nobles from across the region. The guest list includes visiting earls, wealthy merchants, church officials, and even a representative from the king's court. The stakes couldn't be higher. The kitchen has been transformed into something resembling a military command center. Willem has recruited additional cooks from neighboring castles, and temporary ovens have been built in the courtyard to handle the massive volume of food being prepared. The normal kitchen hierarchy has been expanded into a complex organization that includes specialists for different types of dishes, supervisors for different cooking stations, and coordinators who ensure that everything comes together at the right moment. Your current task is helping to prepare the centerpiece of the entire feast, a whole roasted ox. The animal was slaughtered yesterday, and it has been slowly roasting over a massive fire pit in the courtyard since early this morning. The spit mechanism required to turn such a massive piece of meat is operated by a team of 4 men working in shifts, and the entire process requires constant attention to ensure even cooking. The ox isn't just meat, it's a statement. Only the wealthiest lords can afford to serve an entire ox at a feast, and the sight of such a massive roast being carried into the great hall will immediately establish the host's status and generosity. The animal has been stuffed with herbs, spices, and smaller cuts of meat, creating a complex flavor profile that will be the subject of conversation for the entire evening. But the ox is just one element of a meal that will include dozens of dishes. You've spent the morning helping to prepare elaborate pies that contain not just meat, but also eggs, cheese, dried fruits, and spices. These aren't simple pastries. They're architectural marvels designed to impress as much with their appearance as with their taste. One pie has been shaped like a castle complete with towers and battlements, while another resembles a ship in full sail. The fish course alone includes preparation of salmon, trout, eel, and several types of seafood that have been transported from the coast in barrels of salt water. Each fish requires different preparation techniques, and the timing must be perfect to ensure that everything is ready simultaneously. The salmon will be served whole, decorated with herbs, and surrounded by smaller fish arranged in elaborate patterns. The dessert course represents perhaps the most impressive display of culinary artistry. The centerpiece is a subtlety, an elaborate sculpture made from sugar marzipan and pastry that depicts a scene from classical mythology. This particular creation shows the goddess Diana hunting a stag with every detail carefully crafted by skilled artisans who work with food the way other craftsmen work with wood or stone. As you work, you become aware of the incredible logistics involved in organizing such a feast. The timing of each dish must be coordinated so that everything arrives at the tables at the proper temperature and in the correct order. The service itself requires dozens of people working in perfect synchronization, each one knowing exactly where to go and what to do at every moment. The Great Hall has been transformed as well. The usual trestle tables have been replaced with longer, more elaborate constructions that can accommodate the increased number of guests. The high table has been extended and elevated even further, creating a more dramatic visual hierarchy. Fresh tapestries have been hung on the walls, and the floor has been covered with new rushes mixed with flowers and herbs. The lighting for the evening will be provided by hundreds of candles, creating a warm, flickering illumination that will make the entire hall seem magical. Candles are expensive, but the effect they create is worth the cost. The dancing light will make the elaborate costumes of the guests seem even more magnificent, and it will create the kind of atmosphere that makes ordinary conversation seem like courtly discourse. As evening approaches, you help carry the finished dishes to the serving area adjacent to the Great Hall. The sight is breathtaking, dozens of elaborate preparations arranged on tables that groan under the weight of the food. The variety is astounding. Roasted meats, elaborate pies, fresh fish, cooked vegetables, multiple types of bread and desserts that look more like works of art than food. The wine service for the evening will be equally impressive. The Lord's cellars have been opened to provide the finest wines from across Europe, and each course will be accompanied by wines specifically chosen to complement the food. The servers have been trained in the proper service of each type of wine, and they know which goblets to use, how much to pour, and when to refill. The musicians have been preparing as well. The evening's entertainment will include not just background music during the meal, but also specific pieces that will accompany the presentation of certain dishes. The arrival of the roasted ox will be announced with a fanfare of trumpets, while the presentation of the subtlety will be accompanied by a delicate instrumental piece that reflects the artistry of the creation. As the guests begin to arrive, you can sense the anticipation in the air. The visitors are dressed in their finest clothing, and their conversations already reflect their awareness that this will be a special evening. The local nobles are particularly interested in impressing their visiting counterparts, while the visitors are eager to see what kind of hospitality their host can provide. The harvest feast represents more than just a celebration of agricultural success. It's a demonstration of the complex social, economic, and cultural systems that make medieval society function. The food being served tonight represents the labor of hundreds of people: farmers who grew the grain, herders who raised the livestock, hunters who provided the game, cooks who prepared the dishes, and servants who will present them with style and grace. But it also represents the Lord's position in the broader medieval world. His ability to provide such elaborate hospitality demonstrates his wealth, his political connections, and his understanding of the complex social rituals that bind medieval society together. The spices in the dishes show his connections to international trade networks. The quality of the meat reflects the productivity of his lands, and the skill of the preparation indicates the sophistication of his household. As the first trumpet sounds announcing the beginning of the feast, you take your position in the service line. Tonight, you won't just be serving food, you'll be participating in a performance that will be remembered for years to come. The success of the evening will reflect on everyone involved, from the Lord himself down to the humblest kitchen servant. The great hall fills with the sound of conversation, laughter, and anticipation. The guests take their seats according to a carefully planned arrangement that reflects not just social hierarchy, but also political alliances and personal relationships. The visiting earl sits at the lord's right hand, while a wealthy merchant who has helped finance the castle's recent improvements sits closer to the high table than his birth would normally warrant. The first course begins with a ceremonial washing of hands. Servants move through the hall carrying ewers of scented water and soft linen towels, allowing the guests to cleanse their hands before the meal. This isn't just about hygiene, it's a ritual that marks the transition from ordinary time to the sacred time of feasting. The bread arrives first, carried in elaborate baskets and presented with great ceremony. The finest white bread goes to the high table, while coarser loaves are distributed to the lower tables. But even the simplest bread served tonight is of higher quality than what most people eat on ordinary days. The message is clear. This is a special occasion, and everyone present is honored by being included. The first meat course arrives with a fanfare of trumpets. The roasted ox, carried by 6 strong men, processes into the hall like a conquering hero. The sight draws gasps of admiration from the guests, and you can see the satisfaction on the Lord's face as he watches their reactions. The carving of the ox becomes a ceremony in itself, with the Lord's personal carver demonstrating his skill while the guests watch in appreciation. As the evening progresses, course after course arrives with increasing elaboration. Each dish is announced, presented, and served with the kind of attention to detail that transforms eating from a necessity into an art form. The guests respond with the appropriate level of appreciation, understanding that their reactions are part of the performance. The conversation during the meal moves from topic to topic with the practiced ease of people who understand that dinner conversation is a form of diplomacy. News from court, discussions of trade, gentle gossip about mutual acquaintances, all conducted with the awareness that every word might have political implications. As you serve the final course and help clear the tables, you realize that you've participated in something far more complex than just a meal. You've helped orchestrate an evening that demonstrates the Lord's power, reinforces social hierarchies, creates political opportunities, and provides a shared experience that will bind the guests together as a community. The harvest feast represents the medieval world at its most sophisticated and complex. It's a celebration of abundance, a display of power, a political gathering, and a spiritual observance all rolled into one. And as the guests finally begin to disperse, their conversations already turning to how they might reciprocate such magnificent hospitality, you understand that the effects of this evening will ripple through the region's political and social networks for months to come. The wind howls through the castle's stone corridors with a ferocity that makes you grateful for the thick walls surrounding you. It's January, deep in the heart of winter, and the landscape outside has been transformed into a white wilderness that seems to stretch endlessly in all directions. The harvest feast feels like a distant memory now, its abundance replaced by the careful rationing and preservation techniques that will determine whether the castle's inhabitants survive until spring. You're in the storage cellars beneath the kitchen, helping to inventory the remaining provisions. The space is carved directly into the bedrock beneath the castle, its stone walls providing natural insulation that keeps the temperature cool and relatively stable. Wooden shelves line the walls, laden with barrels, sacks, and hanging bundles of food that represent the difference between life and death for everyone in the castle. The first thing you notice is the smell, a complex mixture of wood smoke, salt, herbs, and the distinctive aroma of foods that have been preserved using techniques passed down through generations. It's not an unpleasant smell exactly, but it's completely different from the fresh, immediate sense of summer cooking. This is the smell of survival of human ingenuity applied to the fundamental problem of staying alive when fresh food is impossible to obtain. Willem is checking off items on a long parchment list, his face grave as he calculates whether the remaining stores will last until the spring planting can begin. The mathematics of medieval survival are unforgiving. There's no margin for error, no grocery store to visit if supplies run low. What's in these cellars, plus whatever can be hunted or foraged during the winter months, is all that stands between the castle's inhabitants and starvation. The grain storage occupies the largest section of the cellars. Massive wooden bins hold wheat, barley, oats, and rye, the foundation of the medieval diet. The grain has been carefully dried and stored in conditions designed to prevent spoilage, but even so, Willem examines each bin regularly for signs of mold, insect infestation, or other problems that could destroy months of food in a matter of days. The meat storage showcases the full range of medieval preservation techniques. Whole sides of beef and pork hang from the ceiling, their surfaces dark and hard from the salt curing process. These aren't the tender, juicy cuts that grace the harvest feast. They're tough, intensely flavored, and require long, slow cooking to become palatable. But they're also virtually indestructible, able to provide protein for months without refrigeration. Barrels of salt pork and beef line one wall, the meat packed in so much salt that it resembles more of a mineral deposit than food. The salt draws out moisture, creating an environment where bacteria cannot survive. When properly prepared, salt-preserved meat can last for years, though the process of desalting and preparing it for eating requires considerable skill and patience. The fish storage demonstrates another set of preservation techniques. Dried cod hangs in bundles from the ceiling, the fish transformed into something resembling wooden planks. These will be soaked in water for days before cooking, slowly reconstituting into something that can be turned into a nutritious meal. Barrels of pickled herring provide another source of protein, the fish preserved in a mixture of salt and vinegar that gives them a sharp, distinctive flavor. The vegetable storage is perhaps the most impressive, showing the medieval cook's understanding of how different foods respond to different preservation methods. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and onions are stored in bins of sand, which keeps them moist enough to prevent shriveling while dry enough to prevent rot. Cabbages hang from the ceiling, their outer leaves dried and protective, but their inner cores still fresh and crisp. Dried peas and beans fill numerous sacks, their protein content making them essential for winter nutrition. These will be soaked overnight and then cooked into thick, warming stews that can feed many people from relatively small amounts of ingredients. The dried herbs hanging in bundles from the ceiling will provide the flavoring that transforms these simple ingredients into palatable meals. The dairy storage demonstrates the medieval understanding of fermentation and aging. Wheels of hard cheese, their surfaces covered with protective wax, can provide nutrition and flavor for months. The cheese-making process, which began with the spring's milk production, is now paying dividends in the form of food that actually improves with age. As you help Willem count and record the remaining supplies, you begin to understand the complex calculations that govern winter survival. It's not just about having enough food, it's about having the right kinds of food properly preserved and stored in the correct proportions to maintain health and strength through the long months when fresh food is unavailable. The bread being baked in the kitchens above reflects these winter realities. The fine white flour that graced the harvest feast has been replaced by coarser meals that include more of the grain and stretch the wheat supply. The bread is darker, denser, and more filling, less elegant than summer bread, but more practical for the current circumstances. The daily meals have changed dramatically since autumn. Fresh meat is rare, reserved for special occasions, or when the hunters manage to bring down game. Most meals center around thick stews and porridges that combine preserved meat with dried vegetables and grains. These dishes are hearty and warming, designed to provide maximum nutrition and satisfaction from relatively simple ingredients. The wine storage reveals another aspect of medieval preservation. The best wines from the harvest are being carefully aged in wooden barrels, their flavors developing slowly in the cool, dark environment. But most of the wine being consumed daily is younger, harsher stuff that serves primarily as a safe alternative to water. The alcohol content kills many of the microorganisms that make water supplies dangerous, and the wine provides calories and nutrients that supplement the winter diet. As you work in the cellars, you become aware of the absolute quiet that winter brings to the castle. The bustling activity of harvest time has been replaced by a more measured pace of life dictated by the need to conserve both food and fuel. People move more slowly, eat more deliberately, and think more carefully about every expenditure of energy. The kitchen activity reflects this changed rhythm. Instead of the frantic preparation of elaborate feasts, the cooks now focus on techniques that extract maximum nutrition from preserved ingredients. Bones are boiled for days to create nutritious broths. Tough cuts of meat are braised slowly until they become tender, and every scrap of food is used to its fullest potential. The Great Hall has been transformed as well. Heavy tapestries have been hung to provide additional insulation, and the seating has been rearranged to take advantage of the warmth from the great fireplace. The meals are more intimate, more focused on sustenance than spectacle. The conversation is different too, less about politics and more about practical matters of survival and the hope of spring. As you finish the inventory and climb back up to the kitchen, you carry with you a new understanding of the medieval relationship with food. In summer, food was about abundance display and social ritual. In winter, it becomes about survival, ingenuity, and the careful management of resources. The preserved provisions in those cellars represent not just food, but human knowledge, skill, and foresight applied to the fundamental challenge of staying alive. The transition from abundance to scarcity, from fresh to preserved, from plenty to rationing, is one of the defining experiences of medieval life. It shapes not just what people eat, but how they think about food, time, and the future. Every meal becomes a reminder of the seasons of human vulnerability and of the skills and knowledge that make survival possible. As you help prepare the evening's stew using carefully rationed amounts of salt pork, dried peas, and preserved vegetables, you understand that you're participating in a tradition that stretches back centuries. The techniques being used tonight have been refined through generations of trial and error, passed down from cook to cook, each one adding their own knowledge to the collective wisdom of survival. The stew bubbles slowly in the great pot, its aroma filling the kitchen with the warming sense of herbs and cooking meat. It's not the elaborate spiced dishes of the harvest feast, but it's honest food that will provide warmth and nourishment through the long winter night. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of medieval cooking, that food is ultimately about life, and the skilled cook is one who can sustain life under any circumstances. The bell for prime has just finished ringing, its resonant tones fading into the pre-dawn darkness as you make your way to the monastery's kitchen. The world outside is still gray and quiet, but inside the stone walls of the abbey, the day's work has already begun. You're not a monk, you're a lay brother, someone who has chosen to serve God through manual labor rather than through the complex rituals of monastic life. but you've found your calling in the Abbey's kitchen, where feeding the community has become a form of prayer. The monastic kitchen is a study in contrasts. On one hand, it's a place of deliberate simplicity where the rule of Saint Benedict's emphasis on humility and poverty shapes every aspect of food preparation. On the other hand, it's a place of surprising sophistication where the need to feed a large community year-round has led to innovations in cooking techniques, food storage, and nutritional planning that would impress any modern chef. Brother Marcus, the kitchen supervisor, greets you with a nod as you enter. He's a small, wiry man whose hands bear the permanent stains of a lifetime spent working with food, but his eyes hold the kind of peaceful intensity that comes from viewing cooking as a spiritual discipline. Under his guidance, the monastery's kitchen has become famous throughout the region for its ability to create satisfying, nutritious meals from the simplest ingredients. The monastery's approach to food is governed by the rule of Saint Benedict, which emphasizes moderation, simplicity, and the avoidance of luxury. Monks are supposed to eat enough to maintain their health and strength for their spiritual work, but not so much that they become attached to the pleasures of the flesh. This creates interesting challenges for the kitchen. How do you create meals that are satisfying and nutritious while avoiding the sin of gluttony? The answer you've discovered lies in understanding the difference between luxury and quality. The monastery's meals are simple, but they're prepared with a level of skill and attention that transforms basic ingredients into something truly satisfying. A bowl of porridge made from carefully selected oats, cooked with the perfect amount of water and salt, and served at exactly the right temperature can be more satisfying than the most elaborate feast if it's prepared with genuine care and attention. The monastery's diet is largely vegetarian, not because of any philosophical objection to meat, but because the rule of Saint Benedict restricts the consumption of four-footed animals. Fish is allowed, and eggs and dairy products are part of the regular diet, but the foundation of monastic eating is grains, vegetables, and fruits. This dietary restriction has led to a sophisticated understanding of plant-based nutrition that's centuries ahead of its time. The bread baked in the monastery is legendary throughout the region. The monks have developed techniques for creating bread that's both nutritious and flavorful, using a combination of different grains and a slow fermentation process that develops complex flavors while making the bread easier to digest. The loaves are dense and substantial, designed to provide sustained energy for the long hours of prayer and work that fill the monastic day. The monastery's garden provides much of the fresh produce for the kitchen. The monks have developed sophisticated techniques for extending the growing season, using cold frames and other methods to produce fresh vegetables well into the winter months. The garden is organized not just for productivity, but also for beauty. The monks understand that the act of growing food can be a form of worship, and they've created a space that nourishes both body and soul. The preservation techniques used in the monastery are similar to those used in secular kitchens, but they're applied with a level of care and attention that reflects the monastic emphasis on doing all things well. The cellars beneath the kitchen are filled with carefully preserved foods, each one prepared according to recipes that have been refined through generations of monastic cooking. The daily routine of the monastery kitchen is structured around the canonical hours, the 8 prayer services that divide the monastic day. Each meal is timed to follow specific prayers, and the preparation of food is integrated into the rhythm of monastic life. The kitchen work itself becomes a form of meditation, with the repetitive actions of chopping, stirring, and kneading serving as opportunities for contemplation and prayer. The monastery's approach to fasting is more sophisticated than what you've experienced in secular settings. Rather than simply avoiding certain foods, the monks practice a form of mindful eating that emphasizes awareness of hunger, satisfaction, and the spiritual significance of food. Meals are eaten in silence while one of the monks reads from scripture or the lives of the saints, creating an atmosphere where eating becomes a form of worship. The monastery's hospitality extends beyond its own community. The rule of Saint Benedict requires that guests be received as Christ himself, and this means that the kitchen must be prepared to feed visitors with the same care and attention given to the monks themselves. The guest meals are slightly more elaborate than the regular monastic fare, but they're still characterized by the same emphasis on quality, simplicity, and spiritual significance. The monastery's influence on the surrounding community extends beyond its spiritual mission. The kitchen serves as a training ground for young people who want to learn cooking techniques, and the monks freely share their knowledge of food preservation, bread making, and other culinary skills. The monastery's reputation for quality food has made it a center of culinary innovation that influences cooking practices throughout the region. As you work through the morning helping to prepare the day's meals, you become aware of the profound peace that pervades the monastery kitchen. The work is demanding, but it's performed in an atmosphere of quiet concentration that's completely different from the frantic energy of secular kitchens. Here, cooking is not just about feeding people, it's about creating an environment where spiritual growth can flourish. The monastery's approach to food has taught you that eating can be a form of prayer, that the careful preparation of simple ingredients can be a path to spiritual insight, and that the act of feeding others can be one of the highest forms of service. The meals prepared in this kitchen may be simple, but they're prepared with a level of care and attention that transforms them into something sacred. As the bell for terce begins to ring, calling the monks to their morning prayers, you put down your knife and join in the prayer that opens each meal. The words are familiar, but in this context, they carry a weight and meaning that you've never experienced before. You're not just asking for blessing on the food, you're acknowledging that the meal itself is a gift, an opportunity for nourishment that enables the continuation of the spiritual work that gives meaning to all of life. The monastery kitchen has taught you that food is never just about food, it's about community, about service, about the fundamental human need to care for one another. In this simple room with its stone walls and wooden tables, you've discovered that the highest form of cooking is not about creating elaborate dishes to impress others, but about preparing simple food with love, attention, and a deep understanding of its spiritual significance. The loaded wagon creaks and groans as it navigates the rutted road, its wooden wheels finding every stone and pothole with jarring precision. You're traveling with Master Edmund, a successful wool merchant whose business takes him across kingdoms, and you've learned that eating well on the road requires as much planning and skill as preparing a feast in a well-equipped castle kitchen. The difference is that here, everything must be portable, durable, and capable of providing nutrition under the most challenging circumstances. Your current position is somewhere between uncertainty and adventure. Your Master Edmund's assistant, responsible for managing the practical aspects of the journey, while he focuses on the complex negotiations that drive medieval commerce. This includes responsibility for the traveling provisions, a task that has taught you more about food preservation and meal planning than all your previous kitchen experience combined. The wagon carries a carefully selected array of foods designed to sustain the traveling party for weeks without access to fresh ingredients or proper cooking facilities. The selection process reflects a deep understanding of nutrition preservation and the practical realities of medieval travel. Every item has been chosen not just for its nutritional value, but for its durability, portability, and ability to remain edible under conditions that would destroy most foods. The foundation of your mobile pantry is hardtack, a type of bread that's been baked until it's so hard it can literally be used as a weapon. The flour, water, and salt mixture is baked at low temperatures for hours, driving out every trace of moisture and creating a food that can last for years without spoiling. It's not appetizing in its raw form, but when soaked in water, wine, or broth, it becomes palatable and provides the carbohydrates necessary for sustained energy. The protein sources reveal the ingenuity of medieval food preservation. Dried meat cut into strips and cured with salt provides concentrated nutrition in a form that's nearly indestructible. The process of making this jerky requires careful attention to temperature and humidity, but when properly prepared, it can provide high-quality protein for months. The taste is intense and salty, but after days of travel, it becomes genuinely appealing. Cheese represents one of the most sophisticated preservation techniques in your arsenal. The wheels of hard cheese in your wagon have been aged for months, their surfaces sealed with wax to prevent contamination. The aging process has concentrated the flavors and created a product that actually improves with time. A small piece of this cheese provides not just protein and fat, but also the kind of complex flavors that make simple meals satisfying. The dried fruits and nuts serve multiple purposes in your traveling diet. They provide quick energy essential vitamins and the kind of sweet flavors that make other foods more palatable. Dried apples, pears, and plums have been carefully prepared to remove moisture while preserving as much nutrition as possible. The nuts, almonds, walnuts, and hazelnuts provide healthy fats and protein while requiring no preparation beyond cracking the shells. The spice collection reflects both the practical and commercial aspects of Master Edmund's travels. Small quantities of precious spices like pepper, cinnamon, and cloves serve to flavor the simple meals while also representing valuable trade goods. The spices can transform a bowl of porridge made from hardtack and water into something that's actually enjoyable to eat. The liquid provisions require special attention. Water is essential, but dangerous contaminated water can end a journey as quickly as any bandit attack. The solution is to carry water in specially treated containers and to supplement it with wine and beer whose alcohol content kills many harmful microorganisms. The wine also provides calories and makes the monotonous diet more psychologically acceptable. The cooking equipment must be minimal but effective. A small iron pot, a wooden spoon, and a sharp knife represent the entire kitchen for the traveling party. The pot can be used for boiling water, making porridge, or cooking the occasional fresh ingredients that might be acquired along the way. The knife serves not just for food preparation, but also as a tool and weapon. The daily routine of eating on the road is dramatically different from the elaborate meal rituals of castle life. Meals are functional rather than ceremonial, designed to provide nutrition and energy rather than to display wealth or facilitate social interaction. The morning meal might consist of hardtack soaked in watered wine, supplemented with dried fruit and nuts. The midday meal eaten while traveling might be nothing more than dried meat and cheese. The evening meal, when there's time and opportunity to build a fire, might include hot porridge flavored with spices and whatever fresh ingredients can be foraged or purchased. The psychological aspects of eating on the road are as important as the nutritional ones. The monotonous diet, the lack of fresh foods, and the constant uncertainty of travel create a hunger that goes beyond simple physical need. The careful use of spices, the occasional treat of fresh bread purchased in a town, and the social aspects of shared meals around a campfire all help to maintain morale during long, difficult journeys. The commercial aspects of food become apparent as you travel. Different regions have different specialties, and Master Edmund is always alert to opportunities to purchase local foods that might be valuable in other markets. The saffron that's common in one region might be worth a fortune in another. The techniques for preserving fish that are standard in coastal areas might be completely unknown inland. The social aspects of food are equally important. Sharing meals with other travelers, accepting hospitality from local people, and participating in the food culture of different regions all serve to build the relationships that make successful commerce possible. Food becomes a universal language that allows people from different cultures to connect and communicate. The seasonal aspects of travel food become apparent as the months pass. Summer travel allows for more fresh foods and easier cooking, while winter travel requires careful planning to prevent food from freezing and to maintain nutrition when fresh foods are unavailable. The timing of journeys must take into account not just weather and road conditions, but also the availability of food supplies. The regional variations in food culture provide constant learning opportunities. Each area has its own specialties, its own techniques for food preservation, and its own customs around hospitality and meals. Understanding these differences is essential for successful travel and commerce. As you help Master Edmund prepare the evening meal by the side of the road using ingredients that would have seemed impossibly simple, just months ago you realize that you've gained a new appreciation for the complexity and sophistication of medieval food culture. The same principles that govern castle feasts, attention to nutrition, understanding of preservation, and awareness of social significance apply to travel food, but in a compressed, intensified form. The meal you're preparing tonight, hardtack porridge flavored with spices, dried meat, and cheese, might not seem impressive compared to the elaborate feasts you've helped prepare, but it represents the same fundamental human need to transform simple ingredients into something nourishing and satisfying. The skill required to maintain nutrition and morale under the challenging conditions of medieval travel is every bit as sophisticated as the skills required for castle cooking. The traveling merchant's provisions have taught you that good food is not about luxury ingredients or elaborate preparation. It's about understanding the fundamental principles of nutrition, preservation, and flavor, and applying them creatively under whatever circumstances you encounter. Whether you're feeding a lord's household or sustaining a traveling party, the goal remains the same: to provide nourishment that enables people to do their work and live their lives. As you settle down for the night, your stomach satisfied by the simple but well-prepared meal, you reflect on how travel has expanded your understanding of food and its role in human life. The road has been your teacher, showing you that the principles of good cooking are universal, even when the kitchen is nothing more than a fire by the side of the road and the pantry is whatever you can carry in a wagon. The bell that normally calls the castle to meals has been silent for 3 days. It's the summer of 1348, and the Black Death has arrived in your region with the inexorable certainty of a change in seasons. You're one of the few servants still healthy enough to work, and the responsibility of feeding the surviving inhabitants of the castle has fallen to you and a handful of others who seem, for reasons no one understands, to be resistant to the disease that has already claimed half the population. The great hall, once filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter, now echoes with an emptiness that seems to press against your chest. The high table sits empty. The Lord succumbed to the plague a week ago, followed quickly by most of his family. The surviving lady of the castle has barricaded herself in her chambers with her youngest son, and meals are left outside her door, with prayers that they'll both survive another day. The kitchen has become a place of grim efficiency. Gone are the elaborate preparations and ceremonial presentations of normal times. Now every meal is a battle against despair, hunger, and the growing realization that the world as you knew it might be ending. The surviving inhabitants eat not for pleasure, but for survival, and the food you prepare reflects this new reality. The most immediate challenge is the breakdown of normal food systems. The merchants who normally bring spices, exotic ingredients, and fresh supplies have either fled or died. The farmers who supplied the castle with grain and livestock have abandoned their fields to seek refuge in distant areas rumored to be free of the plague. The complex network of trade and agriculture that normally keeps the castle supplied has simply collapsed. Your stores are dwindling rapidly, but that's not the only problem. The dead cannot be buried quickly enough, and the stench of decay hangs over everything. The water supply has become questionable. Too many bodies have been thrown into rivers and wells by people too desperate or too sick to dispose of them properly. Even the air feels contaminated, carrying what people believe to be the poisonous vapors that spread the disease. The surviving inhabitants have become obsessed with food as medicine. Ancient beliefs about the healing properties of certain foods have taken on desperate urgency. Garlic is consumed in enormous quantities, its strong smell believed to ward off the bad air that carries the plague. Vinegar is added to everything, its sharp acidity supposedly able to cut through the corruption that breeds disease. Wine consumption has increased dramatically, not just for its alcohol content, but for its supposed ability to purify the blood. The meals you prepare now are strange combinations of practicality and superstition. A typical dinner might include bread soaked in wine and garlic vegetables that have been pickled in vinegar and whatever meat remains from the castle's dwindling livestock. The food is seasoned not just for flavor, but for its supposed medicinal properties, herbs that are believed to strengthen the body against disease, spices that are thought to purify the blood, and combinations that come from medical texts rather than cookbooks. The social aspects of dining have been completely transformed. The formal protocols that once governed castle meals have been abandoned in favor of practices designed to prevent the spread of disease. People eat quickly and silently, avoiding close contact with others. Shared dishes have been replaced by individual portions, and the communal goblets that once symbolized fellowship have been replaced by personal cups that are washed obsessively between uses. The psychological impact of the plague on food culture is profound. Meals that were once celebrations of life and community have become desperate attempts to maintain some semblance of normalcy in a world that has gone mad. The surviving inhabitants eat with a kind of focused intensity, as if the act of eating itself is a form of resistance against the forces of death that surround them. The breakdown of normal food systems has forced you to become creative in ways that would have been unthinkable before the plague. You've learned to identify edible plants that grow wild around the castle, to catch fish from streams that might not be contaminated, and to preserve foods using techniques that were once considered beneath the dignity of castle cuisine. The elaborate hierarchies of medieval food culture have been replaced by a simple equation: eat what you can find when you can find it and hope it doesn't kill you. The preservation techniques that were once luxuries have become essential survival skills. Every scrap of food is carefully saved and used. Bones are boiled repeatedly to extract every bit of nutrition. Vegetable scraps are turned into broths. Even moldy bread is saved and used after the mold is carefully scraped away. The waste that characterized normal castle dining has been replaced by an almost obsessive attention to using every available calorie. The religious aspects of food have taken on new significance. Every meal begins and ends with prayers that have an intensity and desperation that would have been unthinkable before the plague. The surviving inhabitants ask not just for blessing on their food, but for protection from the disease that seems to strike without warning or logic. The act of eating becomes a form of prayer, a desperate plea for another day of life. The medical beliefs of the time have created specific dietary requirements for those who are sick or thought to be vulnerable to disease. Certain foods are believed to strengthen the body's natural defenses, while others are thought to weaken them. The surviving inhabitants follow these dietary rules with religious devotion, believing that their food choices might literally determine whether they live or die. The isolation imposed by the plague has created a strange intimacy in the castle. The surviving inhabitants have become a kind of extended family bound together by shared terror and the daily struggle for survival. Meals are eaten in small groups with people who might never have spoken to each other before the plague, now sharing food and fears with equal intensity. The economic implications of the plague have transformed the castle's food culture. The elaborate displays of wealth that once characterized castle dining have become impossible, not just because of the lack of supplies, but because such displays seem obscene in the face of mass death. The surviving inhabitants eat simply not out of choice, but out of necessity, and the former markers of social status have become meaningless. The hope that sustains the surviving inhabitants is fragile but persistent. Each meal that doesn't make them sick is seen as a small victory. Each day that passes without new deaths is celebrated quietly. The food you prepare carries this hope. It's not just sustenance, but a daily affirmation that life will continue, that the plague will eventually pass, and that the world will somehow return to normal. As you prepare what might be the last meal from the castle's remaining stores, you realize that you've witnessed the complete transformation of a food culture. The elaborate rituals, social hierarchies, and ceremonial presentations that once defined castle dining have been stripped away, revealing the fundamental truth that food is ultimately about survival. The plague has taught you that all the sophistication and complexity of medieval cuisine ultimately serves one simple purpose: to keep people alive. The meal you're preparing tonight is simple bread made from the last of the wheat vegetables from the castle's garden, and a thin broth made from bones that have been boiled many times before. It's not impressive by the standards of normal times, but it represents something more important than luxury. It represents the human refusal to give up, the determination to continue eating and living and hoping even when the world seems to be ending. As you serve this simple meal to the handful of survivors who remain, you understand that you're participating in one of the most fundamental human activities. Despite the death and despair that surround you, despite the breakdown of all normal systems, people still need to eat. And as long as there are people to feed, there will be those who find ways to prepare food, to serve it with dignity, and to use it as a foundation for hope. The plague year has taught you that food is not just about pleasure or status or social ritual. It's about the basic human determination to survive, to continue to find meaning and hope even in the darkest of times. And perhaps that's the most important lesson that any cook can learn, that the act of preparing food is ultimately an act of love, a way of saying that life is worth preserving, that tomorrow might be better than today, and that as long as there are people to feed, there is reason to hope. The first crocus pushes through the snow outside the castle walls, its purple petals a shock of color against the white landscape. You're standing in the kitchen garden, breathing in air that carries the faint but unmistakable scent of warming earth and new growth. It's been the longest winter in memory, but spring has finally arrived, and with it comes the promise of fresh food, renewed life, and the gradual return of the rhythms that make castle life sustainable. The garden itself tells the story of survival and hope. The beds that were carefully prepared last fall have been protected under thick layers of straw and manure, and now as the snow melts, you can see the first green shoots of onions, leeks, and herbs pushing through the earth. The sight fills you with a satisfaction that goes beyond mere hunger. It's the satisfaction of seeing the cycle of life complete itself of knowing that the careful planning and hard work of the previous year has made this moment possible. The kitchen has been transformed by the arrival of spring. The heavy preserved foods that sustain the castle through the winter months are still necessary, but they're now supplemented by the first fresh ingredients of the new year. Wild greens can be foraged from the meadows around the castle, their bitter flavors a welcome contrast to the monotony of stored foods. The castle's chickens dormant through the winter are beginning to lay eggs again, providing fresh protein and the ingredients for more elaborate cooking. The psychological impact of fresh food after months of preserved provisions is profound. The first salad of the year made from young dandelion leaves and wild herbs tastes like a revelation. The bitter greens awaken taste buds that have been dulled by months of salt-preserved meat and root vegetables. The texture of fresh leaves, the bright flavors of young herbs, the simple pleasure of eating something that was alive and growing just hours ago, all combine to create a meal that's as much about renewal as it is about nutrition. The castle's inhabitants approach these first fresh meals with an almost religious reverence, after months of rationing and careful conservation. The abundance of spring feels miraculous. The Lord who survived the winter's hardships, along with everyone else, declares that the first substantial meal of spring greens will be shared by everyone in the castle regardless of rank. It's a gesture that acknowledges the shared struggle of winter and celebrates the collective survival that has brought everyone to this moment. The preparation of spring's first feast requires a different kind of skill than the elaborate presentations of autumn. The ingredients are delicate, requiring gentle handling and minimal cooking to preserve their fresh flavors. Young lettuce leaves are dressed with the last of the precious vinegar. Wild onions are barely wilted in warm fat, and the first tender shoots of vegetables are steamed just enough to make them palatable while preserving their crisp texture. The foraging that supplements the garden's early produce has become a community activity. Small groups venture out from the castle to collect wild garlic, whose sharp flavor can transform a simple soup into something memorable. Nettles, despite their stinging leaves, are prized for their nutritional value and their ability to add substance to thin broths. Wild herbs like sorrel and dandelion are gathered not just for their flavor, but for their supposed medicinal properties. Their bitter compounds believed to purify the blood after the heavy foods of winter. The fishing that becomes possible as the streams thaw provides another source of fresh protein. The techniques for catching and preparing fresh fish are different from those used for preserved fish, requiring knowledge of seasonal behavior and cooking methods that preserve the delicate flavors of fish that have never been salted or dried. The first fresh trout of the year, grilled over an open fire and seasoned with wild herbs, becomes a celebration of the season's renewal. The dairy production that resumes as the castle's livestock emerge from winter shelter provides ingredients that have been missed for months. Fresh milk still warm from the cow is a luxury that had been forgotten during the long winter. The butter and cheese that can be made from this milk are softer and milder than their preserved counterparts, requiring different techniques and creating different flavors. The bread-making process undergoes its own transformation as spring arrives. The heavy, dark breads of winter give way to lighter loaves, made from the last of the carefully hoarded white flour. The addition of fresh herbs and the first tender vegetables creates breads that are as much about flavor as they are about nutrition. The act of baking these special breads becomes a ritual that marks the transition from winter's austerity to spring's abundance. The social aspects of spring dining reflect the season's theme of renewal. The formal hierarchies that govern castle dining are relaxed slightly, allowing for more interaction between different social classes. The shared experience of winter's hardships has created bonds that transcend normal social boundaries, and the spring meals provide opportunities for these relationships to be acknowledged and celebrated. The planning for the coming year begins with the spring meals. The success of the winter's preservation techniques is evaluated, and plans are made for improvements in the coming season. The garden is expanded based on what foods were most missed during the winter, and new preservation techniques are discussed and planned. The spring meals become not just celebrations of survival, but planning sessions for future abundance. The religious significance of spring food is emphasized in the castle's observances. The season of Lent, with its dietary restrictions, gives way to the celebration of Easter and the lifting of fasting requirements. The first meat meal after the Lenten fast becomes a celebration that rivals the harvest feast in its significance. The lamb that's traditionally served for Easter dinner symbolizes not just the religious significance of the season, but the renewal of life that spring represents. The trade relationships that support the castle's food system begin to resume as spring travel becomes possible. Merchants who disappeared during the winter months return with new supplies, exotic ingredients, and news from distant regions. The castle's own products, preserved foods, aged cheeses, and stored grains become valuable trade goods that can be exchanged for the spices, wines, and luxury items that make elaborate cooking possible. The medical beliefs about spring food emphasize the need to purify the body after winter's heavy diet. Bitter herbs are consumed in large quantities, their sharp flavors believed to cleanse the blood and prepare the body for summer's heat. The balance between different types of food, hot and cold, wet and dry, is carefully maintained according to the medical theories of the time. The seasonal rhythm of medieval life becomes apparent as spring progresses. The careful balance between preservation and consumption, between scarcity and abundance, between survival and celebration, creates a way of life that's intimately connected to the natural world. The spring meals are not just about fresh food. They're about the renewal of hope, the celebration of survival, and the preparation for the cycle to begin again. As you work in the kitchen preparing meals that combine the last of winter's preserved foods with the first of spring's fresh ingredients, you realize that you're participating in one of humanity's oldest and most fundamental activities. The seasonal cycle of food production, preservation, and consumption has shaped human civilization for millennia, and the medieval castle represents one of the most sophisticated expressions of this ancient relationship between people and the natural world. The meals you're preparing today, simple combinations of preserved meat, fresh greens, and early vegetables, represent the culmination of a year's worth of planning work and hope. They're proof that the systems and techniques developed over centuries of medieval life can sustain a community through the harshest conditions and bring them safely to the abundance of a new growing season. As the evening meal is served in the great hall, with its mixture of winter's preserved foods and spring's fresh ingredients, you see the faces of people who have survived not just the physical challenges of winter, but the psychological challenges of isolation, scarcity, and uncertainty. The meal they're sharing is more than sustenance. It's a celebration of community, a recognition of survival, and a promise that the cycle of abundance and scarcity, hardship, and celebration will continue. The spring renewal has taught you that food is ultimately about continuity, the continuity of life, of community, of the human ability to adapt and survive. The elaborate feasts of autumn and the careful rationing of winter are both part of the same system designed to ensure that life continues, that communities survive, and that the knowledge and skills necessary for survival are passed from generation to generation. As you finish clearing the last of the spring dinner dishes and bank the fires for the night, you pause to reflect on the journey you've taken through the year of medieval castle life. From the elaborate harvest feasts to the desperate measures of plague years, from the careful preservation of winter stores to the joyful renewal of spring, you've witnessed the full cycle of medieval food culture in all its complexity and sophistication. The castle kitchen, now quiet in the late evening, seems to hold the memory of all the meals you've helped prepare. The stone walls have absorbed the aromas of countless dishes. The wooden tables bear the scars of years of preparation, and the great fireplace has warmed foods that nourished kings and commoners alike. This room has been your classroom, your workshop, and your temple, teaching you that cooking is about far more than simply combining ingredients. You've learned that medieval food culture was not the crude, primitive system that many people imagine. Instead, it was a sophisticated network of agricultural knowledge, preservation techniques, culinary skills, and social rituals that sustained complex societies for centuries. The techniques you've mastered, from the careful aging of cheeses to the precise timing of feast preparations, represent the accumulated wisdom of generations of cooks who understood that food was literally a matter of life and death. The social complexity of medieval dining has revealed itself to be as intricate as any modern diplomatic protocol. The placement of guests, the selection of dishes, the timing of service, and the symbolic meaning of different foods all contributed to a system of communication that could convey alliance, hostility, respect, or dismissal without a single word being spoken. The medieval feast was theater politics and sustenance all rolled into one. The seasonal rhythms that governed castle life have taught you about the intimate relationship between human society and the natural world, the abundance of harvest time, the careful rationing of winter, the renewal of spring. These weren't just practical necessities, but spiritual and psychological experiences that shaped the medieval understanding of time, mortality, and the meaning of life itself. The preservation techniques you've mastered represent one of humanity's greatest achievements. The ability to extend the life of food through salting, smoking, drying, and fermentation made civilization possible by allowing people to survive through seasons of scarcity. The medieval castle's stores of preserved foods were not just supplies, but insurance policies against famine, symbols of security and demonstrations of human ingenuity. The hierarchical nature of medieval food culture has shown you how intimately connected eating is to social structure. The quality of bread, the cut of meat, the type of wine all served as visible markers of social position that reinforced the order that medieval society depended on. Yet you've also seen how shared meals could create bonds that transcended social boundaries, how the act of eating together could create community even across class lines. The religious dimensions of medieval food have revealed the deep spiritual significance that eating held for medieval people. The elaborate rules governing fasting, the symbolic meanings of different foods, the rituals that surrounded meals, all reflected a worldview in which the physical and spiritual worlds were intimately connected. Every meal was an opportunity for spiritual reflection, every bite a reminder of divine providence. The regional variations in food culture have shown you the incredible diversity within medieval society. From the monastery's simple but sophisticated vegetarian cuisine to the merchant's portable provisions, from the castle's elaborate feasts to the peasant's basic but nutritious meals, each social group developed its own food culture, adapted to its specific needs and circumstances. The technological innovations in medieval cooking, the development of new preservation techniques, the creation of elaborate cooking equipment, the refinement of baking methods, demonstrate that medieval society was not static, but constantly evolving. The techniques you've learned represent centuries of experimentation, failure, and gradual improvement. The international aspects of medieval food culture have revealed the extent to which medieval society was connected to the wider world. The spices that flavored castle feasts came from distant lands. The techniques for food preservation were shared across continents, and the movement of foods and cooking methods helped create the first truly global culture. The medical beliefs about food that you've encountered reflect the medieval understanding of the relationship between diet and health. While many of these beliefs might seem strange to modern minds, they represent a sophisticated attempt to understand nutrition and its effects on human well-being. The medieval emphasis on balancing different types of food, the careful attention to seasonal dietary requirements, and the use of food as medicine all demonstrate a nuanced understanding of the relationship between eating and health. The crisis responses you've witnessed, the desperate measures of plague years, the careful rationing of winter, the adaptations to crop failures have shown you the resilience and creativity of medieval food culture. When normal systems broke down, medieval people found ways to survive, to maintain nutrition, and to preserve the knowledge and skills necessary for recovery. The role of women in medieval food culture, from the lady of the castle overseeing elaborate feasts to the servant women who performed much of the daily cooking, has shown you how food preparation was both a source of power and a form of service. The kitchen was one of the few places where women could exercise significant authority, and the skills they developed there were essential to the survival of their communities. The economic aspects of medieval food culture have revealed the extent to which eating was connected to wealth, power, and social status. The ability to provide elaborate hospitality was a form of political power. The control of food supplies was a source of authority, and the knowledge of cooking techniques was a valuable skill that could provide economic security. As you reflect on your year in the medieval castle kitchen, you realize that you've gained more than just historical knowledge. You've developed an appreciation for the complexity and sophistication of pre-modern food culture, an understanding of the intimate relationship between eating and social structure, and a respect for the skills and knowledge of the people who created and maintained one of humanity's most successful food systems. The medieval castle kitchen has taught you that food is never just about nutrition. It's about community, identity, power, spirituality, and the fundamental human need to create meaning and beauty in the midst of the daily struggle for survival. The meals you've helped prepare were not just sustenance, but expressions of human creativity, symbols of social order and celebrations of the complex culture that made medieval civilization possible. The techniques you've learned, the recipes you've mastered, and the social rituals you've participated in represent a form of cultural knowledge that connects you to centuries of human experience. You've become part of a tradition that stretches back to the earliest human communities and forward to the modern kitchens, where people still struggle with the same fundamental questions. How do we feed ourselves? How do we create community through shared meals? How do we use food to express our values and create meaning in our lives? The medieval castle kitchen has shown you that these questions have no simple answers, but that the search for answers is one of the most fundamentally human activities. In learning to cook medieval food, you've learned something about what it means to be human, to create culture, and to find meaning in the daily acts of preparation, service, and consumption that sustain life itself. As you finally leave the kitchen and make your way to your quarters, you carry with you the knowledge that you've participated in something timeless and universal. The techniques may change, the ingredients may vary, and the social structures may evolve, but the fundamental human need to transform raw materials into nourishment, to create community through shared meals, and to find meaning in the act of feeding others remains constant. The medieval castle kitchen has been your teacher, showing you that cooking is not just a practical skill, but a form of cultural expression, a way of creating and maintaining social bonds, and a means of connecting with the deepest aspects of human nature. In learning to prepare medieval food, you've learned to appreciate the complexity and sophistication of human culture, the resilience and creativity of the human spirit, and the enduring importance of the simple act of sharing a meal. The lessons you've learned here will stay with you long after you've left the castle walls. Every meal you prepare, every technique you use, every moment you spend in a kitchen will be informed by your understanding of the medieval food culture that shaped centuries of human civilization. You've become part of a tradition that honors the past while pointing toward the future, that celebrates human creativity while acknowledging human limitations, and that finds meaning in the most basic and essential of human activities. The medieval castle kitchen has shown you that food is ultimately about love, love of community, love of tradition, love of the craft itself, and love of the people who are nourished by the work of your hands. In learning to cook medieval food, you've learned to participate in one of humanity's oldest and most important forms of love, the love that is expressed through the simple act of feeding others. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all, that in a world of constant change and uncertainty, the act of preparing and sharing food remains a constant source of meaning, connection, and hope. The medieval castle kitchen has taught you that cooking is not just about survival, it's about what makes survival worthwhile. Word count approximately 20,000 words. This completes our journey through the medieval castle's food culture, from the elaborate harvest feasts to the desperate measures of plague years, from the careful preservation of winter stores to the joyful renewal of spring. We've explored not just what medieval people ate, but how food shaped their society, their relationships, and their understanding of the world around them.